with us Shashank Singh, partner and head of India office at Apax Partners. Thank you, Shashank, for joining us today. And we are extremely excited and we are looking forward to hear your perspective on the subject.
Trina, thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Shashank. So my first question for you, Shashank, is what is gender diversity according to you and why is it important for firms?
It's a really great question. And Trina, we at Apax asked ourselves the same question about 8 or 10 years ago, when we hadn't until then really not been tracking any of the statistics. And we did a full kind of survey of the firm. And what we found was that actually less than 10%, something like 8% of the investment team at Apax was women globally. And we took the toughest statistic to move, which was the investment team. We didn't sort of cloud this by saying, oh, let's add our back office, let's add our portfolio team, let's add other support functions, etc., where we were thankfully better represented when it came to a gender balance. We took just the investment team and it was as low as 8%. And we sort of said, look, we shone the spotlight on ourselves and we said, this is terrible, right? How can it be so low? That was the kind of first aha moment for us. And then we said, look, we're going to make ourselves vulnerable and expose ourselves. So what we did was at our next annual investor meeting, we reported it to our investors, to our LPs. And we said, look, here is where the current situation of Apax is right now. It's not great. We're going to focus on it and we're going to improve it. And we're going to continue to track it and we're going to report it to you every 6 months. So we held kind of a mirror to ourselves, as it were. And we said, look, this is something that we are determined to change. And we're going to expose ourselves around it because, it's practically public at that point. Now, why is it important? Why did we feel as the partners, we thought about it, we said, why is this something that we want to change, right? Why were we so determined to make a change at starting 8 or 10 years ago? It's for several reasons. First of all, we feel that a more diverse team ultimately leads to better investment decision making. There's lots of research which says that if you're sort of one homogeneous group, in this case males, you don't necessarily, there are blind spots. There's stuff that you just don't see. And in our process, our investment process at Apax, we find we make better investment decisions when there are diverse views in the room. When those views come out, they're debated, discussed, you see a problem or an investment from lots of different angles, and you ultimately come to a better consensus view to get to an investment decision. That is why having, first of all, diversity on the team, diversity of gender, diversity of thought, diversity on a lot of other dimensions we felt was important to us. So that was one. Two is, it was just, with the way Apax, from a demographic perspective, was set up those days, it was just not a good reflection versus where society is, right? We at the end of the day invest on trends that are trends within the broader population, within the economy, within countries. And if we don't reflect that thought process ourselves, i.e. diversity, again, gender, but also other dimensions, then we're just not reflective of society. We're not going to do the best job we can. And then finally, when it comes to thinking about the future, if we don't have a diverse, welcoming workplace, then we're not going to attract the best talent. I mean, how is it smart that you ignore 50% of the population when it comes to thinking about picking the best investors, the best investment professionals, the best operating executives, best portfolio company management teams, if we're just ignoring half the population when it comes to hiring, training, retaining talent? So we sort of said, look, this can't work. And at a personal level, I would say, look, I have 2 children, older boy, younger girl. And as I think about what does the world look like, what does the workplace look like for my daughter, fast forwarding 10, 15, 20 years from now, I want her to feel like I could work anywhere. I can be successful anywhere. I can make my mark and a career anywhere. And I don't want Apax to look like a place where she says, "Oh no, it's not a place I want to go." Right? So though there was a broader economic reason, there was also a personal reason for it.
Thank you, Shashank. I think the instances which you shared were extremely powerful and well defined. That brings me to my next question. Would be, can you share the turning point or the aha moment or a trigger of one of the instances that made you aware of the challenges that exist in the space of gender diversity?
Look, I don't know if there was any one trigger moment. Maybe there was one actually. We hired, and I'm somewhat ashamed to say that even the India team at Apax, frankly, looked like the rest of Apax. In fact, perhaps even worse from a gender diversity perspective. So we started our office in India in 2007. And until 2018, so 11 years, there was not a single woman in the team. And, we were carrying on with life as usual. I would say we never put any conscious thought or effort into really hiring a diverse team. We were kind of going along with the flow. And we would have a mixed pool of candidates when it came to hiring and for jobs. But somehow at the end of it, we always ended up with a male candidate who kind of made it. And when we sort of said, look, we as a firm, we kind of shone the spotlight on ourselves and we said, look, we're going to change this. I kind of was scratching my head and saying, why is it that we're not ending up with the right candidates here? And there was a position that we were hiring for, as I said, in 2018. And we went through the usual process. We hired a search firm. Search firm came up with candidates. We went through multiple rounds of interviews and case studies and so on, as we do, as is normal for us as part of our hiring process. And at the end of it, we ended up with, again, a male candidate, or actually a couple of male candidates. And the team who was involved in the hiring said, and I kind of asked them, look, how come there's no women that have made it to the final round here? They said, it's very hard. Pool is very small, and they didn't make it past the case study. They didn't make it past the modeling test or something, financial modeling test. So I sort of said, look, that doesn't make sense. And at that point, I sort of said, look, I'm happy to hire whichever candidate you propose, as long as it's a woman. So you put everyone through the interviews, that's fine. But we've got to change how we look. And if you don't make that effort, you're not going to get that. And what I found as part of that was that there were a bunch of, I would say, probably unconscious biases that were baked into our hiring process, just to pick one area, right? Which was making it difficult. There were, first of all, a bunch of males or men who were interviewing and screening. Secondly, as we were going through the interviews themselves, there may have been, and I don't know for sure, but there may have been instances where we were filtering out very capable, qualified women candidates because they didn't necessarily match up to a particular standard according to preconceived notions. And then finally, we sort of convinced ourselves, look, the pool is small and therefore we're just not going to find. So let's not make the effort. And when we found that we collectively as a team broke that paradigm, we sort of said, no, it's not going to work. What we got out actually were phenomenal women candidates. And we ended up hiring a woman who's done incredibly well as part of that. And that then set the ball rolling. So we went from a position of 0% women in the team, and I'm talking specifically about Apax India, in 2018 to now 25%. And headed, I would say, but probably by the middle of this year to closer to 35%. So it's, and that once you break some of those paradigms, I would say, or unconscious biases, or preconceived notions, whatever term you want to use here, then it changes. And I've seen now over this last 4 years, as the team has become more diverse from a gender perspective, many more women in there, etc. It changes how we approach stuff. It changes how we, like I said, the theory was a more diverse decision making will lead to better decisions. Absolutely. And now occasionally it will still pop up, but for the most part, it's not. It's part of everyone's subconscious that, of course, yes, the team has to be diverse, and that leads to better outcomes. It's now there's no more that kind of push and pull to say, no, we need more women in the candidate list, and we need to sort of make sure that we hire. It's just happening naturally.
Thank you, Shashank, for answering this beautifully. I mean, and congratulations on the success that you have made. I'm sure a lot of people will be able to resonate with this problem and also the solutions that you have given. So now that we know that Apax has a very strong culture of diversity and inclusion, my next question would be, how do you champion the cause of gender diversity within your firm and the portfolio companies? And if there are any anecdotes that stand out from your journey?
Sure. Look, so I'll separate the question into two parts, both within Apax and with portfolio companies. I would say the first point on championing within Apax, I've talked about already, which is we do it institutionally, which is we report on it to our most important sort of constituency, which is our LPs, our investors. Every 6 months, we report progress. How are we doing on gender diversity? And by the way, the one statistic I kind of gave you, by the way, the firm is sort of in the mid-high 20s when it comes to proportion of women. But that one statistic's not enough, because there's a lot of given the pyramid structure in teams, there's a lot more women at the lower levels, but how many women partners does one have? And as recently the BCG WinPE report kind of also spotlighted for India. So we track women at every level at Apax, at the associate level, VP level, principal level, partner level. We track progress, how women are doing going through the levels, because it's no good having a leaky bucket. It's no good hiring a lot of women at the entry level, but then losing them at a certain point in time. It's about making women successful over a long-term career in private equity, because private equity is a long-term career. It's an apprentice-based business. It takes a long time to grow a partner within a firm, and that's the general philosophy that we apply at Apax. And so we've thought quite, I'd say deeply about how do you make women successful at the firm over a long period of time? How do you solve for pain points when women want to start families? How do you support them through that? When women go through different points in their lives, how can the firm support them through that? How do you make sure there's a system of mentorship within the firm? Senior women mentoring more younger women through the firm. How do you make sure that the workplace is conducive and is welcoming and isn't a turnoff for women, which means things like unconscious bias training for everybody. Things like thinking about very simple stuff. Like I remember when Mitch had done the interview with at the launch event a couple years ago. He gave a small anecdote, but we come across this every day, right? So the small anecdote was in our break room in the cafeteria, lunchroom in our New York office. There's a big screen TV on the wall, and it was always playing sports, which is great for men, right? In America, you go into the lunchroom, you watch a little bit of basketball or football, and in your break and you go back. But it made it an unwelcoming type of environment for women who weren't interested in that. Now, I'm not trying to gender stereotype. I'm sure there's lots of women who are interested in sport, but for some who aren't, then the lunchroom becomes an area that they don't want to go into. Then you miss out on some of the conversations that happen there. So it's the big things, but it's also the little things. And every one of them kind of adds up in my experience, in our experience. So thinking through all of that, the work environment, how do women feel, but also how men kind of engage with women at the workplace. So all of that thought process kind of goes into how do you make women successful longer term at Apax. Now, coming to portfolio companies, again, this is something we track. Broadly, you don't measure it, you're not going to manage to it. So we measure women in the workforce in our portfolio companies, women at executive levels, so CXO level within our portfolio companies, women CEOs, and women board members. And one of the efforts we make is to make sure we have diverse boards, because that then leads to, again, start from the top, leads to a cascading effect all through. That is something that is often in our control, to have more women on boards, which we do quite categorically. And we track, we engage with portfolio company execs on exactly this. When a search goes out for a CEO, CXO, or board member, we make sure we push the search firm to have a diverse panel of candidates. In some cases, we engage with firms that specialize only in women candidates. So there's all sorts of these processes, Trina, that we use to make sure that we end up with the right outcome. Again, back to more diverse teams, better decision-making, a gender balance within our portfolio companies that reflect what society looks like, makes it better and easier for us to engage, or our portfolio companies to engage with the broader world, and make sure we are hiring the best talent from the 100% of the workforce, not 50%.
Thank you, Shashank. I mean, these examples are exemplarily good, and I think a lot of the audience will be able to resonate with it. And these examples clearly shows that commitment from leadership levels is critical to champion gender diversity. And thank you for doing that at Apax. So, coming to my last question, what are some common myths and stereotypes about men and gender diversity that you would like to bust?
It's a good question. I would say maybe one or two. I'd say the first is there's a perhaps presumption, or it's unsaid assumption that, look, men will be resistant to this idea. And I would say, by this idea, I mean the idea around gender balance and gender diversity in private equity funds and portfolio companies, etc. In my experience, like you said, Trina, just now, this has to be something, a core value that leadership of firms believes in, because without it, you're just paying lip service, you'll never make any progress, right? So the first is, if you've got even if it's a male leadership, but a male leadership that believes in it, it is something that you can succeed in, right? So having leaders who really embrace it as a value and push it through firms and make sure systems, processes, work environment, all of that is conducive to it, I think you can end up with the right result. So that would be kind of the core myth, I would say, that we should all sort of think about busting. It doesn't need a woman leader at a firm to end up with a diverse workforce. You can have men that drive to the same outcome, right? So that's one. The second is, I would say, there's this kind of belief that, look, if all boys club helps other boys, that somehow men have an unfair advantage, that because they're all men and maybe they're interested in cricket, or maybe they're they have interests that are aligned, etc., that somehow it leads to exclusion for women. I actually think that women can turn that on its head by supporting each other in the workplace, right? Looking out for other women and creating an unfair advantage for women, which frankly is the need of the hour, because there are lots of other challenges that women face in the workforce. And if women can help each other and find the right male mentors as well, it will lead to the right outcome.
Thank you, Shashank, for sharing this. And I completely agree that similarly, like boys club is something that exists, but similarly women can support women, and that can give a lot of encouragement and support and create a holistic ecosystem. So thank you, Shashank, and it's been a pleasure to chat with you today. And I would like to finally say that there is no doubt that significant amount of work needs to be done to build gender balance. But I am sure with role models and industry champions like you leading this effort, progress is soon on the way.